this is my review of My Hero Academia. Okay, so in this episode, a bit of a truth about All Might comes out. So it's a very heavy scene, we'll put it, because it explains why Sir Night-Eye and All Might had a bit of a falling out, and we knew it had to be something pretty bad for them to no longer be on speaking terms. But this episode explains that it was about as bad as we were expecting. So while on the streets, it actually recaps what happened in previous episode at the end from Deku's perspective. So Deku and Mirio have a bit of a back and forth about how Hero Work Studies works, and about how Deku kind of needs to work on it a little bit since he kind of missed out on the basics during his internship, as he explains to Mirio, and they exchange hero names. While they do that, Deku begins to contemplate what happened between Sir Night-Eye and All Might that caused them to have such a falling out if they're no longer on speaking terms. Remembering that All Might didn't want to speak to him in the first place, and also realizing that Sir Night-Eye knew about All Might's quirk, so he realizes something's up. But as he starts to figure out what all that means, that scene with Eri happens again, and while he tries to look her over for injuries, she recoils at his touch, and he's a little confused as to why. It should be known that Eri is covered in bandages and stuff like that, and Deku is quick to pick up on that. At which point, Overhaul shows up, and Mirio tries and fails to defuse the situation. He tries to play it off so that Deku and Overhaul don't wind up coming to blows, by not only putting Deku's mask on so that Overhaul is no longer able to read Deku's facial expressions, but also tries to talk up Overhaul to get him to try and leave them alone. And sure enough, it sort of works, but until it's time for the heroes to depart and get back on their work studies in their patrol route. Because at that moment, Eri clings to Deku and won't let go, and it's very clear that she's terrified of Overhaul and is terrified of being alone with him. So Deku quickly starts explaining his thoughts, pointing out that he notices that this isn't the kind of normal behavior that should be exhibited from a child her age, and Overhaul decides instead to talk in private by bringing them into the alley where Eri ran out of, and explains how she kind of doesn't listen to him, and it gets harder and harder because he doesn't like having to discipline her, but he will if he needs to. And sure enough, it's shown that he's about to get violent, but Eri decides to go with him to prevent it, and Deku is forced to watch as Eri leaves with Overhaul. And after realizing that, and after Mirio points out what I just said about how Overhaul was planning to get violent with them, Deku decides to leave it alone, at least for now, but he expresses his concerns a little bit later. So after he meets up with Sir Night-Eye again, after the two meet up after Sir Night-Eye stakes out the Shie Hasekai's hideout, and the two meet up, and Deku explains what happened, and sure enough, Sir Night-Eye apologizes personally because he should have used foresight on them and realized that if he hadn't, they probably wouldn't have wound up going in that way, and probably wouldn't have wound up running into Overhaul. So afterwards they explain just how dangerous his quirk is. So Sir Night-Eye and Bubble Girl have been watching Overhaul for a while now, and they point out that there was actually a group of thugs who we saw that tried to rob a bank, got blown up, but by Overhaul's quirk. But according to the police, not only were the guys completely unharmed and none the worse for wear, but apparently all the money that they had stolen had just mysteriously disappeared, despite the very obvious evidence of a fire. So there was no crime that they could pin them with, so they eventually let the guys go. But with the point out being that Overhaul's quirk works in a way that nobody is really able to accurately predict yet. So it's a little bit dangerous. So, and also, while Deku and Mirio are talking, Mirio brings up that they actually met Eri, who is Overhaul's daughter, as he explains. And Deku is very adamant about trying to save Eri, but Sir Night-Eye pushes him off, pointing out that if they rush things, it's only going to result in her getting hurt and Overhaul getting away. So he points out that he needs to have a little bit more patience, and then they decide to go back to the agency and finish up for the day. The next day, we're explicitly told that some of the students are absent because they're now going on their hero work studies now that they've gotten jobs. And Deku is having a little bit of trouble concentrating because of everything he's learned. About how Sir Night-Eye knows about the quirk, about Eri, about all of it. And eventually realizes he needs closure, so he goes to look for All Might, who is out jogging, and basically orders All Might to explain everything, pointing out that All Might kept a lot of secrets from him with Sir Night-Eye, and that All Might at the very least owes him an explanation. So All Might does exactly that. He explains that for a number of years, he and Sir Night-Eye were in fact partners. He was in fact All Might's old sidekick, and the two were inseparable up to a point, and that Sir Night-Eye was actually the brains behind All Might's brawn. So the two were in fact thick as thieves, as it were. But, however, that all changed once All Might's injury showed up, after his fight with All For One that caused his injury. So as the scene explains, Sir Night-Eye tried desperately to get All Might to stand down as a simple piece and retire on the spot, inadvertently revealing that he used foresight on All Might, and explained that if he kept going the way he was, he would eventually die at the hands of a villain. And we knew this already. There was a lot of evidence for this about how All Might had been struggling even with his injury to try and take down villains, and it was becoming evident that eventually he was going to meet a villain he wouldn't be able to defeat. So he would eventually wind up getting in a lot of trouble and wind up dying in the process. So Sir Night-Eye pointed out that it was only a matter of time, but All Might refused, pointing out that he needs to remain the symbol of peace, at least for a little longer, so that he can show everybody that there's still hope in the world and that he's still there to represent it. So that was partially what caused their falling out, but the other part was that All Might had actually picked a successor without Sir Night-Eye's input, and that was what caused the falling out. So as this explains, Sir Night-Eye wanted Mirio to actually be All Might's successor, and a couple of other people wanted him to as well, but All Might wound up running into Deku first, so Deku wound up being the new successor, and that's what caused their falling out. Sir Night-Eye finds out that Deku was going to be the next successor, and regardless of physical ability or not, Deku had the ideals to actually pursue it forward. And even though there were other people that were technically more qualified to be the next successor. So Deku is sent reeling after learning all this, and tells All Might that he can't die just yet, pointing out that if he dies before Deku is able to officially become the new symbol of peace and say, "I am here," he's going to be very heartbroken, pointing out that he kind of needs All Might there to actually see him say it before dying, as it were. And All Might responds back that because of his relationship with Deku, he might actually have changed his future already, pointing out that he thought it was going to be the end when he fought All For One, but because Deku was there with him, he realized that Deku had a much more profound impact on his life than he thought, and that was actually what gave him the motivation to actually get back against All For One and win. So as he points out, Deku has inspired him just as much as he's inspired Deku. So he points out that he'll continue living so long as he can actually fight fate together alongside Deku, pointing out that he needs Deku just as much as Deku needs All Might. So it's a really cute ending to end on, with Deku realizing that he now needs to try and find a way to mend the bond between Sir Night-Eye and All Might, pointing out that if he was the one that caused their falling out, he should be the one to fix it. So he's trying to. So now the episode sort of ends with Deku trying to piece the relationship back together. But however, there's actually a B plot here, which is that immediately after returning to the base, Overhaul, not surprisingly, kills the guy responsible for letting Eri wander off, and has her prep for another test of her quirk. But as they're getting ready to go do the test, it's revealed that Shigaraki is actually planning to work with them under the right conditions, and actually gives them a phone call. So it's going to be interesting now. Now the League of Villains is actually going to be working with Overhaul, possibly, and it's going to be very interesting. So I'm interested to see what the right conditions are, but it is an interesting idea that now not only are All Might and Deku going to need to mend their bond with Sir Night-Eye by actually proving that All Might still cares about Sir Night-Eye and his opinions, but also explains that he wants to try and help All Might fight his fate and not die, which is pretty noble. So, but yeah, it's also explained that the Chiya Heiseikai are actually using Eri's quirk as the master ingredient in the entire Chiya Heiseikai's plan. So, whatever their thing was that enabled them to get rid of somebody's quirk, Eri is apparently responsible for it. So it's going to be interesting to see what exactly her quirk is, if it gives the ability to remove another person's quirk, it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. But yeah, this episode had a lot to unpack. I hope I did an adequate job. If you guys think so, then what did you guys think? Let's get a discussion going in the comment section down below, or over on my Discord server, link in the description. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, be sure to follow me on Facebook and on Twitter in the description below. And also check out my Patreon in the description below as well. It's only a couple bucks a month. It really helps me out, and you guys get access to a bunch of cool perks that are my way of saying thanks. So be sure to check those out in the description below as well. But in any case, thank you guys so much for watching, and until next time, I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace!